So welcome everybody. So glad you could join us today. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to mention that we have on this coming Friday at 7 p.m. we have Bonnie Kistler signing, and she'll be signing her new book, The Cage. And it will be an in-person signing, simultaneously on Zoom as well. So if you want to join us, please join us. I'd like to mention also that Deborah has graciously offered to give a free tote bag, see, beautiful tote bag with purchase of one of her books. I think it's really it's a pretty cover and a pretty tote bag. Deborah Goodrich Royce, her first novel, Finding Mrs. Ford, debuted in 2019 to rave reviews, and Ruby Falls is just as good. She divides her time between the Northeast and Florida, where she writes, reads, watches lots of movies, and spends time with her family. Please welcome Deborah Goodrich Royce.
Well, thank you for those of you coming out on this beautiful sunny day. I'm going to stand a little bit. Is this right here? I'm going to stand right here. Come in. You're right on time. We're just beginning. So, it's a beautiful day. So thanks for coming out. And I've got my mom. So I thought if nobody else came on this gorgeous day, I'd have my mother. So here we are in Florida, and we're going to be talking about thrillers, and we are in this gorgeous bookstore which is dedicated to that. So what I write really are identity thrillers. So that's not really a thing in the modern parlance. It's not really a category, but I like to think of it as such. The kind of thrillers that really examine who people are, the secrets they are keeping, and then there's the process of the book, which is the unveiling of those secrets. I find that to be the most interesting thing in life. Is you meet people, and generally we really all have secrets. Most of our secrets are quite benign, but occasionally I have met in my life people who have, big secrets, the doozies, and that is interesting to me. So I began life as an actress. I went to college in Ohio. I'm from Michigan, and I went to a very small women's college back in the day when there were still a lot of women's colleges. And because it was so small, I was a foreign language major. I majored in French and Italian, but I was able to participate in other departments in the college because, in large colleges, you really do get kind of, on your track. You stick in your own department. So I acted in plays, and I was a minor in dance. And the summer before my senior year of college, I was in Ohio doing summer stock theater, and I was cast as a background dancer in a movie that was being done then and there by United Artists, big film studio at the time. And it was a movie with Frank Langella and Tom Hulce. Frank Langella has kept up his career to this day, so you'd be very well aware of who he is. If you don't remember Tom Hulce, he played Mozart in the film Amadeus. And I think he's gone on to be a director. I don't think he's acting anymore. So there I was, a college student in Ohio, dancing in this movie. And the movie was about summer stock theater. It was called Those Lips, Those Eyes, which is a line from a lyric in an old musical. And I was in the background as a Dutch girl. I love to say that that was the one and only time I got to wear a Bob Mackie dress. And most of us remember Bob Mackie dresses from Cher, and they were very sexy dresses. Mine was not. It was Bob Mackie was doing something different at this moment. So we had big ruffled collars and big puffy sleeves, and it was Old New York, this Dutch girl song. So I did that. And the choreographer was from New York. He was a famous choreographer named Dan Soretta. And he kept saying to me, you should come to New York and audition for me. Well, I was from the Midwest, and I was very literal. I thought he meant I should come to New York and audition for him. So I finished college early. I was back in Michigan working in an office without a plan in the world. And I picked up a copy of Variety at a little local bookstore. Do you guys remember Variety? It was that big theatrical publication. And it had notices in the back that said what auditions were being held. And Mr. Serretta was holding auditions at the Minskoff Theater in New York City at 1515 Broadway. And I'm stressing that address because it became pertinent in my life 40 years later. So I wasn't cast. I flew to New York. I auditioned for Mr. Serretta, not cast in that musical. I spent about a year auditioning for musicals on Broadway, and I really wasn't good enough. I got close, but not cast in anything. To jump to the present, just to, you know, young people, first of all, a lot of young people think they have to do everything now, accomplish everything they're ever going to accomplish now. And the other thing is when you're young, it's very hard to see that big full circle of life and where things are going. 40 years after I auditioned at 1515 Broadway and did not get the job, Ruby Falls was about to come out. In January of last year, my publisher called me and said, what do you think about taking an electronic billboard on Broadway? And my question was, of course, how much will that cost? Because you know the writer pays for everything at the end of the day. Everything gets kind of taken off the chit. And I will tell you the price, though I wouldn't normally tell you the price of anything, because it was such a low price for a triple billboard on Broadway, $3,500. And I said, you know, I think we should do that. So April the 27th of last year, my girlfriends and I drove into New York, and there was this triple billboard of this gorgeous cover right above the door of 1515 Broadway. And I thought, you know, if I could have been a little angel or a little something fairy saying to my younger self, listen, don't worry, this is not going to work out for you, but in 40 years, you'll be back at this door with your name above it. I never would have believed it, but it is a wonderful reminder that even if we don't understand our lives, there is some rhyme and reason going on. So after a year of pursuing dance, like I said, I realized I wasn't quite in the league of, you know, these young women who were professional Broadway dancers. So I switched to acting. You know, what I was thinking, I don't know, but I had a different experience. And I spent the first year doing a lot of commercials. Lest you think I was talentless as a dancer, I was cast in a couple commercials as a dancer, Coca-Cola, bacon flavored Cheetos, which was a terrible product. And it was the era of Fame. So we were dancing. Do you remember the movie Fame, set in a high school in New York? We were dancing up the corridors, up and down corridors of high school, singing about Coca-Cola and bacon flavored Cheetos. Within a year, I was cast on All My Children, huge soap opera at the time. And I played the sister of the star. Erica Kane was the main character on that show, played by Susan Lucci, and I played her sister, Silver Kane. This is going to play into this book. So I did that in 82 and 83, and then I was written out, and within 10 months, Paramount Pictures flew me to Los Angeles on a screen test. And this was, the director was Michael Lesak, the star of the show was Christopher Lloyd. You remember him from Taxi and Back to the Future. And it was a pilot for an ensemble series called Old Friends. Really good cast. Fun tidbit, recently, have any of you watched that, that series? I don't even know if they've done another season, which is about Nurse Ratched. It's kind of the prequel to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's done in crazy colors, and she's a younger nurse in California. Anybody seen that? Well, it's fun. It's weird, but it's fun. The producer or the head writer on that is a woman named Jennifer Salt, whose sister I played in that series all those years ago. So funny life goes on for everybody. So I ended up moving to California. There was a lot more work there, and I worked for really 10 years as an actress in film and television. I had a very nice run of it, tying in this thriller idea, this identity idea. One of the parts I played opposite Mark Harmon, he played Ted Bundy, and I played the woman who married Ted Bundy. And she married him in Florida, if you remember that. Bundy had gone on a murder spree, really from the Pacific Northwest, ending up in Florida. He had killed a bunch of people at a sorority. He was defending himself because I think, he was a megalomaniac in addition to whatever else he was. And he put this girl on the witness stand in this horrific murder trial and said, "Will you marry me?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "Then I do hereby marry you." And that was it, legal and binding. So I played her, and talking about identity and who people are, I did a lot of research about her, tried to figure out what she was thinking in marrying him at that moment in his serial killer career. I think it was very hard to believe he didn't do it, but I can only think she believed he didn't do it. So I worked for 10 years, got married, had 2 little girls. My first husband had grown up in Paris, and in the early 90s, LA was weird. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on in Los Angeles, and we had the opportunity to move to Paris. He was going to do a project with his mother, and so we packed up, we went to Paris, and that really was my first pivot to writing, because I was hired by a French film studio as a reader. All film studios keep readers on the payroll. It's a freelance job. You read the manuscript of a screenplay or a book. You write a synopsis for the bosses because they're not going to read it. They're just going to read your synopsis. And then you write a page of notes, really, all the things that you learn about character and story and, the arc and all of it. So that was really a nice job. I had 2 little girls living in Paris, reading for a living. And we were there, I think, 92 and 93. And then my first husband was hired by Julia Roberts to run her development company at Disney. She had signed a deal with Joe Roth, who was running Disney at the time. And the 90s were an era when many actors had these, they were development deals at studios. The studios would put up not a lot of money. They would give maybe 1 or 2 people office space who worked for the star, and they would read material on behalf of the star, and then the studio had a first look right of refusal. So their deal was at Disney, and if Julia wanted to do project A or B or C, Disney got the first right to say yes or no. Then they were able to take it elsewhere. So we briefly went back to LA, but Julia wanted to be in New York. So they set up the company in New York. And then, hold your breath, I was hired by Harvey Weinstein to work at Miramax as a story editor, which is like a book editor. And going back to this idea of identity, I have very complicated thoughts about all of that. I certainly don't condone his behavior, and I don't disbelieve the women, but I, in the time I worked for him, did not have that experience of him, and he gave me a huge opportunity as a former actress to step into this editorial role. So it's hard for me to say anything about that. I'm very grateful for my years at Miramax. It was really at the top of the business in the 90s. Miramax was doing many of the greatest films, and for me, my years at Miramax were like writing school. I was in having this opportunity to edit the writing of greater writers. I was learning much more about the craft of writing. Coming up to the 2000s, I left Miramax because the job was just too onerous, having 2 little children. My weekend read was often 12 scripts and a novel. I'm not a speed reader. I am a high content reader. I have high retention of what I read, but I cannot whiz through it. So that was a lot of reading as a mom of 2 kids. I left the job at Miramax in the late 90s, And within a few years, it wasn't causative, but I'm tripping through the timeline. My first husband left me. So now we're in the year 2000. And that was really a shattering experience for me. It wasn't something I anticipated, I saw coming, and I was really broken for a while from that. But within a short while, in a crazy twist of life, met the man I'm married to now and ended up moving to Connecticut, getting married, moving to Connecticut, and in this weird path to writing. I had just written a screenplay with a friend. It's a very funny Black comedy, based a lot on Othello. Do you remember that movie with Rex Harrison called Unfaithfully Yours? Anybody an old movie buff? He's a conductor in the orchestra. It was remade with Dudley Moore decades later. And he starts to suspect his wife is having an affair, and he has all these wild imaginings of how to kill her. Well, that really was what that screenplay was about. A wife believes her husband is leaving her, and rather than be a cast off, she decides to kill him. And the comedy comes in these increasingly ridiculous ways she goes about trying to kill her husband. And of course, that has a happy ending. So I was involved with writing groups. I was writing straight along, very busy with a lot of projects. And my husband and I took on the restoration of a cinema in Stamford, Connecticut. And when we restored and reopened this beautiful 1939 cinema, we became friends with the actor Gene Wilder. He was living in Stamford. Gilda Radner had died. She'd left him her beautiful old farmhouse there. He had remarried to a wonderful woman, and he got very involved with his cinema, the Avon. So we formed a friendship. He would come every autumn 3 times to talk about movies, once a month. He would present 2 classic films and then one of his own. And it was always a mob scene when it was one of his own, because, he was just so incredible. In this relationship over 10 years, as he was coming to the Avon, we had this email correspondence. And he said at a certain point, "Are you a writer? I think you're a writer." I said, "Well, kind of." And he offered to read the screenplay, which he did. And he was very, very encouraging. So he kept, every time I would see him, he would say, you can picture his voice. "Are you writing? I hope you're writing. You should be writing." So 2014 rolled around, and it was kind of a magic moment for me. I am a woman of a certain age. I am 63. I'm not in the bloom of youth. And I was in my mid-50s. My youngest child was grown and flown. For me, having been a divorced and a remarried woman, parenthood wasn't a straight picnic, and so it was very consuming. So when I reached that moment, I felt this kind of clearing of my mental space. I felt like all this real estate in my brain had been vacated by these darling children, and they're all good. My kids, everybody's good now. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I should try doing it. I had an idea for my first book, Finding Mrs. Ford. This is a non-linear timeline. It begins in 2014 in Watch Hill, Rhode Island, which is a beautiful New England seaside community right on the Atlantic Ocean, when the FBI shows up at the home of a woman named Susan Ford to ask her about an Iraqi Chaldean man. The Chaldeans are Catholics from the north of Iraq. And in August of 2014, they were very much in the news because it was the moment when ISIS was really marauding over the north of Iraq and killing a lot of Chaldeans. And our heroine says she does not know him. And they say, well, that's a little funny. We just picked him up, having taken a plane from Baghdad to Boston in a car on his way to your house. So you know from the get-go that Mrs. Ford is lying. You cut back to 1979 Detroit. Detroit is very down on its heels at that moment. The auto industry is not in great shape. She's in college. She takes a nice summer job at a ladies' boutique and meets a wild girl named Annie Nelson, who in short order convinces her to go get a job at a very sketchy disco, which is heavily populated by Iraqi Chaldean men, big population in Detroit. So that's the setup of this book. What happened in the summer of 1979? Why would Sammy be on his way to see Susan 35 years later? And at that particular moment in time, oh, come in. Hi there, I know you. And come in. And why would she lie about it? So it's a lot of fun. It's the two timelines of 79 and 2014, and it goes back and forth between a seedy Detroit and very rarefied Watched Hill. This has been optioned for an 8-part miniseries with an actress, I can't say her name yet, but she is really at the top of her game. Picture all the actresses you know right now who are in their mid-50s. And, crossing fingers that all comes to play. Ruby Falls it's a Gothic thriller. And I wanted to call it Gothic when I signed a publishing deal, and my publisher said, oh, no, you can't say Gothic. And I said, why? And he was thinking of a lot of younger people when they think of Gothic. It is very heavily freighted toward the supernatural. This is not. This is more Victorian Gothic. Picture Jane Eyre, The Woman in White, and Rebecca. This is a flight of fancy from the premise of Rebecca. It begins in a cave in Chattanooga, Tennessee, called Ruby Falls, when a little girl named Ruby is there with her father. And it begins in the pitch black dark. And she is standing in this cave. She can't see a thing. She hears a waterfall, and she can't tell where it is in proximity to her body. And she's terrified she will fall in. And her father lets go of her hand. And when the lights come back on, he's gone. And she's in a state of shock. The tour guides are looking at her. It's 1968, so we have no credit card records, no cameras, nothing to document the way we would document things now. So the tour guides obviously know she didn't come in alone. They can't remember who she came with. By the end of the day, they've given her to the police. The mom has contacted the police, and daughter and mother are grounded in Chattanooga, Tennessee for the rest of the summer. The mother's dealing with the search and the inquisition into what happened to the father, and the child's in a state of shock. 20 years later, and this is where my soap opera background comes in, she has ditched the name Ruby, which is her middle name. My dad's family was from Tennessee, and they all love middle names. I don't know why, but all of these Tennessee families just like their middle names. So she's ditched the Ruby. She goes by Eleanor Russell. She's an actress on a soap opera, which I call The Finger of Fate. And she is written out, which of course is a very nice way of saying she's fired. And she hightails it for Europe. And this is where it gets very Gothic. She meets a tall, dark, handsome stranger named Orlando Montague. And he is Anglo-Chinese, so he's very exotic. He tells her the story of his mother fleeing China in the revolution and meeting his father in Calcutta. And she marries him. Doesn't call home, doesn't talk to her mother, marries him without knowing him. Always a bad idea. And they're in Rome. They're about to go in the catacombs. She has an attack of claustrophobia and has to be escorted up above ground. And she knows it's right about then she should tell Mr. Orlando Montague about this thing that happened to her as a child. But she does not, of course. So she begins the marriage with a secret. They move to Los Angeles, and it all plays out in the Hollywood Hills, because we all know what that looks like. They find the perfect cottage in the Hollywood Hills. She is cast in a remake of Rebecca at Paramount Pictures, so you get to see the beautiful gates and the lot. And just when her life is in perfect order, of course, Mr. Orlando Montague starts to change. He's not quite as nice as he used to be. He's a little snappish. And she starts to realize maybe he is not all he pretended to be. Those are those two books. And before I stop talking and take questions, March 13th, 2020, you all know where you were. I was right up the road here. My daughter, son-in-law, and my granddaughter, it was my granddaughter's first birthday. And it was that moment, is the world shutting down? Where are we going? What are we doing? Should we have a birthday cake? And everything shut down. So I was here in Florida. I was supposed to do a big Florida book tour, all canceled. My wonderful mother, who's sitting here, her best friend was murdered in 1948 in Pittsburgh. It's an unsolved crime to this day. And when, this is not an original thought to me, when that sort of thing happens, it affects people beyond the victim. It just does. You think about Dominic Dunn, whose daughter was murdered in Hollywood. He used that murder in his life. It really became, I think, the launch pad for his second career, where he really became a chronicler of famous murder trials. Prior to that, he'd been a movie producer. I don't know if you know that. You think about Michelle McNamara. If any of you have read her book or seen the HBO series based on the book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. She grew up in a suburb of Chicago. There was a girl murdered in her neighborhood. It had an effect on her. And she grew up to be what we would now call a citizen detective. And she was almost, not single-handedly, but she was part of a group of these citizen detectives who solved a swath of murders in California that they had originally thought were all these different people all over the state, turned out to be one man, dubbed the Golden State Killer. So my next book is called Reef Road, R-E-E-F, like coral reef. And I like the title. It's a street in Palm Beach. And I also like the name because it sounds like a precarious place, like a place where you could run aground. And Reef Road is a dual narrative. That is set in that pandemic shutdown of 2020 in Florida. And I was here and I remember it being very hot, very claustrophobic, and very buggy that March, April, May. So you have the two narratives. You have this middle-aged writer who lives alone with her dog behind a Publix grocery store in a not great apartment, who's researching the murder of her mother's best friend and murder in general. She's what we now would call a murderino. Have you guys heard that term? There's a podcast called Murderino. It's people who are interested in true crime. So she's a murderino. There she is in Palm Beach. Also in Palm Beach is a younger woman named Linda Alonso, who's married to a very dishy Argentine named Miguel Alonso. And several weeks into the pandemic, Miguel and the two children are seen in face masks, getting on a plane at Miami International, headed for Buenos Aires. And Mrs. Linda Alonso cannot follow because she's an American and everything was shut down then. So the pandemic isn't the main part of that book, but it's a wonderful underpinning for a thriller because it's a constraint, and the face mask is very useful. So that comes out January of 2023, which is actually 75 years after the real murder on which it is loosely based, and many things to be revealed in that. So it's time for me to stop blathering on, and I'd love to take questions. I will answer anything if you want to know about Mark Herman or the movies or books or writing or getting started writing later in life or anything. Yes?
So since you were looking into series, but it seems like you like to write standalone books, are you thinking?
That's a great question. So would I like write a sequel to, people have asked me often to write a sequel to Finding Mrs. Ford. It ends in a way that tees itself up for a sequel. I haven't been called to do it, but I've heard from the producers of the series that, you know, it's 8 parts. I'll tell you one thing she told me, and this isn't a spoiler. Finding Mrs. Ford, when you meet Mrs. Ford, she's a widow in Watch Hill. They plan to begin it with Mr. Ford still alive. They said it kind of ups the stakes of what she has to lose. I think that's actually a great idea. If you're stretching it out over 8 parts, she's in a more precarious position. Where will they go with it? I don't know. And then a great question is, so let's say they take your book and make an 8-part miniseries and they develop it beyond where you intended to go. Can you, the author of the novel, later go back and write a completely different direction? I mean, I don't know. Has that been done? Does anybody know? Yes, it's been done? Oh, okay. So you're talking about Game of Thrones. Okay, so there's the precedent. So the series went in directions that were not his intention, and he just kept going where he wanted to go. So that's kind of cool. Yep. Thank you. Any other questions?
So, and again, right now, are you planning on even writing a series? Completely different with, do you have an idea of a character where you say, oh, I would like to write a series?
I don't yet. I keep having these different ideas. I've started a fourth book. So I just turned in final revisions on Reef Road, and I started a fourth book. I got the most interesting email a month ago from a guy who said, I was your best boy in such and such a movie. Do you guys know what a best boy is? It's a head electrician. And remember that Thanksgiving we had together? And then I saw you at the Cannes Film Festival, and you had the baby, and you were pointing to the baby and pointing to me, and I was wondering if it was my baby, and I'm thinking, I don't remember him. But I did. I looked at a picture. I don't know. And so that is kind of the foundation of what I'm in. I've done 10 pages of notes. I've started writing, but it's kind of a cool premise. Everything he said is, I was there in all those places. But what if you had a heroine who has a spotty memory? What if she drinks? What if this? What if that? What if it's true? What if it's not true? It was a wonderful launch pad. So this gentleman and I have conversed. He's a writer too, now. So it wouldn't be about him, but I would use it as kind of it was a wonderful trigger for an idea. But no, the series thing, I just haven't had that desire to go back. I feel like I kind of wrap up things. I think there's a link in all of my books in this identity concept of people not really being who they pretend they are. But there isn't a character from one to the other. Yes.
Got a Zoom question. I know that you have restored a lot of places. Have you got any ideas from any of these places that you've restored?
So that's true. We've done a lot of restoration. Well, so what I said earlier is kind of a sideways thing, the restoration of the Avon Theater, and then this relationship with Gene Wilder and his encouragement of the writing. But so we've restored a beautiful hotel in Watch Hill called the Ocean House, one in a nearby town called the Weekapaug Inn, and then another one called the Margin Street Inn. We've done a hotel in the Catskills, if anyone knows the Catskills, beautiful Adirondack style lodge called the Deer Mountain Inn. Done another theater? No, I've not yet, like Murder in the Theater or something. No, not specifically that. My husband is really he's the leader of the restoration. He has an incredible ability to stick with a project. And I mean, you're in Watch Hill. He has this ability when you do kind of big restorations, there are a lot of, neighbors and conversations you have, and he can just keep plugging away and going at it year after year. And he has a unique personality for it. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, so you never answered the question. Is he the father of your child?
No. My first husband was the father of my child.
You put that out there, like, then you said it, hey, and I'm like,
Oh, sorry. Well, no, and I don't think he was saying, obviously that wasn't possible. So obviously it wasn't possible, but it's a very interesting, who knows where it'll go in the book. If I write that book, it's a very interesting.
When you read that book.
When?
When you read that
Thank you. Yeah.
So how was it? Is it from going from acting, from being the one who's acting to writing?
So the question is, how is it going from being the person who's acting to the person who's writing? Well, I much prefer writing. I think it's far more my own voice, what I want to say, what I want to talk about. I mean, acting is very fulfilling, and there are great actors out there who put their own 100% of their own interpretation into a character. So it is their voice, but they're interpreting still the words of someone else. And I will, I said to my husband's name is Chuck. Early on when I was writing, I said, I think I'm really a better writer than I ever was an actress. He said, oh, absolutely. I said, well, you don't need to be quite so opinionated about that. Anyway, you have to have thick skin in any of these things. That's another aspect of putting yourself out there creatively, whether you're restoring a building, whether you're acting in a movie, whether you're writing a book. At the end of the day, there are going to be people who like and understand what you do, and there are going to be people who don't. And one must, using the general one, find, you just have to go back and look at, is this the book I want it to be? Is this the book I want it to be? And if it is, you will find your people. You will. And even if it's just 1 or 10, or as long as you resonate with someone, really you've done your job. You're writing really for yourself at the end of the day. Many years ago, I was dating a musician who had this kind of grandiose idea of writing for the masses. And I don't think the masses exist. We're all just people, one by one by one. So if you write something that's clear and meaningful for you, there will be others like you. Not everybody, but some. That's all you can do. Yeah.
Without telling us what it is Ruby Falls a mystery?
Yes, Ruby Falls is a mystery, and it's a Gothic thriller. So I think of Gothic as the classic setup. You have a damsel in distress. Think about Jane Eyre, the Woman in White, Rebecca. That generally a younger woman who comes under the force field of an older, more powerful man in all of those books and in this. And I've used that structure. So she is in Europe, just like the beginning of Rebecca. She meets a stranger. She meets Orlando Montague. Remember, the nameless heroine in Rebecca met Max de Winter. Spontaneous marriage. And then in each case, in Rebecca, they go back to Manderley. In Ruby Falls, they go to Los Angeles. So in Rebecca, the house, Manderley, is almost like a character. It is both a beautiful place and a foreboding place. It's got a lot of mystery around it. And I really wanted to create Los Angeles in that way because we're all familiar with Los Angeles. We've all watched 100 years of American cinema. The whole world has. We know what it looks like. We know what those Hollywood hills look like, those twisting streets, those Spanish houses, those cottage houses, those distinctive lampposts, they're the cement columns with that kind of frosted acorn bulb at the top. You can call all of it to mind. So I wanted to write the Hollywood Hills in the same way that Manderley is and give her that kind of a setting. So it's about a young woman, uncovering really what she's gotten herself into. It does go to a very different conclusion, though, a very different conclusion from Rebecca. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Talking during the book signing, authors are asked, did you know the ending when you started writing?
Great question. Did you know the ending when you started writing? No. Not in any one of the books have I known the ending. So let's talk about one that's brand new, the one I'm working on now. I have 10 pages of notes and that I've started with. And a lot of those notes, well, what if this and what if that? And the terminology, they say, are you a plotter or a pantser? A plotter plots it all out. A pantser kind of flies by the seat of her pants. I'm more of a pantser, but with Finding Mrs. Ford, with the dual narratives, and you go back and forth in time twice, I had to do very clear timelines because you never want to, in one visit to this point, reveal something where you shouldn't have known till this point. And you really got to meld those together and lay them out. But I don't know the ending before I start. Yeah. Well, if there are no more questions, I have books that I can sign. I have tote bags for you. Thank you for coming. Thank you all. I really appreciate it.